Okay. I'd like to call to order the tax hearing at the Nelson County Board of Education. It is Thursday, September the 7th at 4:30 p.m. And I'm going to invite Tim Hawkinsmith up to give us a presentation.
Thank you. Carl, if you'll go back to the first page in that attachment that we just had up there. That's okay. First item on the agenda, the regular session tonight, or the work session tonight, it's an action item, is setting of the tax rate. Just wanted to go ahead and, right at the beginning, state that the recommendation will be the levy of the 4% tax rate. House Bill 44, 4% tax rate, rate in the amount of 76.4 cents. The current rate that you levied last year we levied, I think, the equivalent of a 3% tax rate was 75 cents. We're recommending tonight again 76.4. Does everyone see what I had? Does everyone have that? Okay. 76.4. The 76.4 rate that we're recommending includes 0.3 of a percentage point to recover exonerations from the prior year. Just a reminder, folks, appeal assessments. Our state funding is based on our assessment at the time it's certified. Folks later, after that occurs, can go in and appeal that assessment, the PVA, etc. And occasionally they win that, and when they do, that reduces revenue to the district. However, our SEEK has been established prior to that. The exoneration rate allows us to recover that the following year. So the 4% rate, the 76.1, and the 0.3 exoneration is added on top of that. Carl, if you'll scroll to the next page, I just want to hit a few highlights that in my view, justify the recommendation. First bullet point I have there is the compensating rate for 17-18 is 73.5. That includes the 3-cent exoneration. The compensating rate would generate about $600,000 to $665,000 less than the 4% rate. The 4% rate, as we just said, is 76.4, and the levied rate for the current, or the year that just ended, was 75 cents. A few items. I guess I'm going to jump down to item number 5, or excuse me, item number 6, the authorization of an SRO program that's been discussed in board meetings. Now, that program is not in place yet. We're in the process of working on it as we speak. And we estimate the adoption of an SRO program in the district, the district would incur a cost of $75,000 to $100,000. Later on this evening, we're going to be recommending to you to expand health services in our school district, which would result in the hiring of 4 additional nurses to provide nursing coverage throughout the school district. That comes at the cost, an estimated cost of about $180,000, and we'll get into more detail about the nursing program later, obviously. In June of 2017, the board adopted a 1% cost of living adjustment for all staff, and they, of course, each year we approve salary schedules which include an approximate average step of 1.45% for all of our employees. The total cost of those 2 items to the district is an approximate amount of $500,000 annually. And I am estimating currently, based on flat SEEK funding, a reduction in the amount of SEEK to the tune of several $100,000 compared to fiscal 17. Last year, our total SEEK revenue, we'll get to the exact number in a second, was $15,150,000. Currently, the estimate is around $14,500,000 to $14,700,000. I think there's a chance that it's a good chance that it's going to be closer to 14.5 based on our enrollment numbers that we now have from the first few days of school. There's probably the biggest news item recently, besides the hurricane the last few days, has been the retirement systems in Kentucky. We know, I think there is a special session that will be called. It hasn't been called yet, but we expect that that's going to occur this fall. We know that the classified employee match for classified employees in our district, we have about $4.5 million worth of classified employees, is going up a half a percentage point. It's going from 17.5 to roughly 18% or thereabouts. Now, there's a cost associated with a 0.5% increase, right? Nelson County, that's over $20,000 annually. That's not what I'm concerned about. What I'm concerned about is what will come out of that special legislative session. And we've received estimates that it could be 26, 27%, the match classified retirement. What that would mean to our district, if you take let's say $4.5 million worth of salaries, and you multiply that by 9%, let's say we go from 17 to 26%. I'm using round numbers now. It's pretty simple math. It's $360,000 annually. And we don't know for sure what's going to happen, but we know something's going to happen. We know something is going to happen. I'm not currently including in any of this data teacher match. Now, Mr. Jackie and I were talking yesterday about some of this information. I appreciate him reminding me of KTRS match. Some of you all know that years ago, the state of Kentucky paid for all the teachers in school districts' retirement match, all of them. We didn't pay any of that. And starting in 2012 through 2016, they phased in a cost to school districts of 3%. Started at 0.5%, then it might go to 3/4. I have the exact numbers. I don't remember as I stand here right now, but it capped in 2016 at 3%. Now, 3% doesn't sound like much. Really, it doesn't. Really, when you think about it, 3% doesn't sound like much, but when you multiply it times $16 million in certified staff in the general fund annually, it's about $500,000. So that's what we're spending today that we weren't spending a few years ago. That may not change. That may not change, but certainly things are going to happen as a result of the special session that will be called soon. We don't know exactly what's going to happen. I'm concerned that there will be additional match passed on to school districts. Typically what happens when there's a budget crisis in Kentucky, Kentucky can't deficit spend. It's not legal for the state to do that. Obviously we can't deficit spend. So what's happened many times over my 19 plus years here, the state finds itself in some budget difficulties, and we get notified at some point during the fiscal year. I know we told you were going to receive X, well, you're really going to receive Y. And at that point, we have staff commitments to staff and commitments to other things, and we really are very limited as what we can do about that. And it's happened multiple times. Whether that will happen this year, I don't know, but I do expect there to be some significant changes in how they affect school districts as a result of the special session that I mentioned a couple of times now. I'll remind you, 3 of the last 6 years, you've levied less than the 4% rate. Yesterday, I verified that in 2016, audited numbers for fiscal 2016, 17 numbers aren't available yet. They won't be available until audits are in later this year. But in fiscal 2016, if you go straight to the KDE website and you look at expenses per pupil for things like staff and stuff, you back out debt service, which is your growth nickels, and fund transfers, which are ways to manipulate those numbers. Nelson County ranks 150th out of 173 school districts. And that's available to you at the KDE website. You can go see that for yourself if you'd like. And again, I mentioned earlier, the enrollment in the school district is down slightly. Well, it's not really slightly, it's down about 119 students from the 10th day this year to the 10th day prior year. And what that means, and this gets pretty complicated, but what that means is our per pupil assessment is up. What that means is seat money goes down. So that's not a good thing for districts' budgets when enrollment drops like that. You lose seat dollars, you don't gain additional tax dollars when kids move in, but you do lose seat dollars. So with that, Carl, if you'll go to the spreadsheet document.
Before you leave that.
Sure, sure.
So the number 10 that you had there, where you were talking about the pension, I'll say you were maybe a little bit kind in the way you said that. I'll be a little bit more blunt in that, you know, we continue to hear the governor talk about admonishing the legislature or whomever for kicking the can down the road. That's a phrase that I've heard him use in some of his press conferences. Essentially what's happened here is the legislature for up to 2 decades has decided they're not going to put their portion of the retirement funds into the various retirement systems, KRS, KTRS, CERS, all of those, because they didn't want to have to address a revenue issue. And so what's happened here is they've kicked that can down to us at the local school board level and have said, well, since we're not willing to address it at the state level, you know what we'll do, we'll just change the rules of the game and we'll start having local school districts have to put in more money than what they've been expected to put in the past. And with that, you know, whether it is a 9% roughly round number increase, or even if it's a 1% increase that might come out of that special session, we, and when I say we, I'm talking about students in the classroom, direct impact, we get nothing for that investment. And I don't mean that's not a good investment that doesn't need to happen. That retirement system has to be solvent. It has to be there for those commitments that have been made to the retirees. But that's money that is not paying for a new bus that may be needed. That's not money that's being paid for improvements in a facility that may be needed. It's not being used for technology or for textbooks or for anything. It's money that's just a check that's being written, that's being put there into that retirement system because we're being told we've got to do that because the legislature decided they weren't going to do it themselves. So I think that's, you kind of said it in a nice way. I'll be much more blunt about it. We're basically being told we've got to do this and we have no choice in it and our hands are tied, and oh, by the way, we get nothing out of it other than we're putting in those funds into that retirement system.
That's exactly right. I'll add one additional thing. You know, school districts get this is your one time a year to affect revenue to the district. You don't get to, we don't collect garbage, or we don't provide cable, or we don't do things like that. This is it for you. It's the only option you have. So it's a one-time opportunity, and you don't get to come back like the state might do to school districts or other agencies late in the fiscal year and say, hey, we need some of that money we promised you. Not going to be able to give it all to you. We don't get to send a supplementary bill to taxpayers in March or April. You know, we levied a rate that we really can't get by with. We need another few dollars. This is the only opportunity you have. There are other folks that have other opportunities.
Yeah, I think that's a good point there as well. I don't know how many people follow fiscal court. End of the fiscal year, any funds left over in the county clerk's office from car registration fees gets turned back over to the Nelson County Fiscal Court. And so those operation expenses, which that is a county government entity there, the county clerk's office, there's that other fee structure that they have to be able to pull in additional dollars. Same thing with the county sheriff's office, same thing with the county jail, county landfill. I mean, there's all these other, as you said, fee opportunities for local city and local county government to be able to fund those services. We've got two funding sources. What the state gives us, which continues to go down, or what we're able to get from the local tax dollars to support that education of the students within our community and that harbinger of economic growth in our community.
You mentioned state revenue. I'll mention this again. I've said this many times over the last several years, but in fiscal 2009, our SEEK allocation from the Department of Education was $17.5 million. It's going to be about $14.5 million in 2018. So
with no significant difference in students.
Roughly the same number of students, exactly right. So about $3 million less 9 years later. So there's a serious cost shift to the local taxpayer, honestly, and to the local district.
And what was the year that you were talking about?
2009.
I came across something from 2008, that in 2008, the comparison of state to local seat funding. So the state funding, what we got from the legislature versus what we were able to accrue locally. 62% of Nelson County's budget, the school system's budget, came from the state in 2008. And that's 38% coming here, so about 2 to 1. Fast forward to 2016, those numbers not quite completely shifted, but quite a bit. 2016, the state was down to 48% of what our budget was. That's where the funding came from, less than half, going from 62% in 2008 to less than half, 48% in 2016. So again, this is one of those things where we will hear things where the legislature, the representatives, the senators will say SEEK is being held harmless. What that truly means is the total amount of SEEK dollars is being left alone. It's just each district is getting less out of that because we have increases in student population, so it gets spread a whole lot thinner. So, there's a lot of wordplay that goes on often at the state level whenever it comes to the legislature wanting to try and say, we're not impacting education when they really are, and not only in a way of SEEK, but also again, 7 years ago, we had zero commitment that we had to put into KTRS, and now the state has said, oh, by the way, since we didn't do our job, now you all have to do it for us.
Plus, how many numerous unfunded mandates have they put on the school systems in the last 8 years?
So
And why are we in this shape with the legislature? Because they didn't do their job.
because they didn't do their.
They did not do their job, and they took that money and put it someplace else. They borrowed against what they should have done.
Well, many reasons. Some of
Yes,
them-
many reasons, but that's one of them.
Tax
So,
reform, there's all kinds of things that could have been done.
Yes.
Anyway,
Yes.
Carla, if you want to go to the spreadsheet there, and maybe somewhat of an eye test up there, I don't know, I haven't seen it on the screen yet. Can you blow that up a little bit? Is there any way to do that? There we go. There we go. If you look, you'll see an analysis of fiscal 17 actuals and 4%, 3%, 2% tax rates, 1% and contingency. And the last column is keeping the rate exactly the same as it currently sits. And then the bottom half of that sheet, and that shows you the difference in revenue. The bottom half of the sheet is a reflection of some cost that the district will be absorbing. So if you look at the revenue increased at the top, and you see at the bottom half, you'll see SEEK is estimated to drop from 15,173,582, that's obviously an exact number, to an estimate of about 14.5 million, $673,000 fewer from the state from one year to the next. Then we show the difference in the revenues versus expenses from the previous year. Then we show what we expect, and again, we're going to get into more detail on this later. When we add nurses, we're expecting to add some revenue as a result of those new nurses through Medicaid billing, and that's going to essentially offset the corresponding expense below. Then numbers in red are cost. If you'll scroll down a little bit, Carla, and I'm just going to focus on that far left column. The 1% cost of living adjustment cost you just under $240,000. The average step cost you $347,000 and change. The SRO program, I'm using a $75,000 figure there. That may be low for one officer, just depends on how that takes shape over the next few weeks.
And to make sure people understand, SRO stands for School Resource Officer. That was one of the initiatives, I think, was that at every single one of the community forums that the community encouraged that type of approach. You were there in every one of them, weren't you, Ms. Barrett? The community encouraged that type of program is what was needed within the school system.
I will add, we had an SRO up until a couple of years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago now, And that's another example, I guess. I don't want to use cost shifting, but I don't know another word to use. The sheriff was kind enough for years to provide that. They started that program with some federal grant funds. They continued it with local dollars, but as we know, their dollars are stretched pretty thin, and they got to a point where they just could no longer provide that at no cost. And at that point, the program went away. And I know there's been a lot of interest, shared in these previous board meetings and in those town halls, that we feel like that's going to be a benefit to the district, adding that back, but there is a cost associated with that.
So can I ask a question? So what does that $75,000 cover? Is it strictly salaries?
Just salary and benefits.
Just salary and benefits.
If there are other expenses associated, there shouldn't be a tremendous amount of additional expense. One that would not be a recurring expense would be that person's going to need a vehicle to drive around because they'll be traveling the entire district. But as far as recurring expenses, I think that's a safe estimate for one person. Ultimately, if you find that you need more than one person, that cost will go up. So the ISS program, the in-school suspension program that you've seen some board presentations on, I think there was an editorial in the paper recently about it, is underway right over here at Horizon Academy, and I may have gotten that name wrong. I know we changed the name, sorry about that. But there's costs associated with that. There's a couple of positions involved there. I do think the schools are appreciative of having that as an option, and I think there's a lot of potential in that program. But there are costs associated with it. And then what I'm showing there is the expansion of those 4 nursing positions. I'm estimating those salaries. Of course, we haven't hired those people yet. But I'm showing a corresponding revenue. I don't want to inflate expenses and not bring up the fact that we expect to pay for those additional 4 nurses, and we'll get into more of that later with the Medicaid expansion or Medicaid billing for their services. And then you see a $20,000 increase in CERS that we know is going to happen this year. And then you see the estimate that would go into effect in fiscal 19 just below that. If you add all that revenue and all those expenses up, you see at the 4% tax rate level, you see a negative net effect of a little over $55,000 on the budget going forward.
Meaning that if 4% is taken, there will be a small dent within the contingency fund.
Possibly. Of course, we have to factor in there are other things that are, if we have people leave and they're replaced with people that make less, some of that can be made up. But if you look at just the raw numbers, yes, that's correct.
Or if the school resource officer comes in at 67,000 instead of 75, I mean, again.
Right, and if they come in at 85, then the reverse will occur, that's right. So with that, I'll be glad to try to answer any questions you all have.
So I thought that the 1% cost of living increase that we approved last year was based off of the current budget that we had in place, because our budget was so healthy and our budget was and so we could allow that 1% cost of living. Why is this being tied to this?
Well, you got to remember, some of the things were at the time that we did that, we didn't have a lot of these other things in play. SRO, ISS, additional costs for CERS. Those are all things that have come along since then. I know
those are attached to this too.
I'm sorry?
But those are all attached to this too.
But this is for the tax rate presentation. I'm not sure I'm following your question.
So we had approved that 1% cost of living increase back,
Right.
when was it?
And you did that in June.
Yeah,
In June.
great. And it was based off of the current budget that we had in place.
Right.
Based on the monies that we currently had. There was, so I don't understand why that's being tied to the taxes, but to a justification for increase.
But that same budget that you were talking about, the tentative budget we talked about in May, and then in June we talked about salaries, the tentative budget reflected the 4% tax rate as well.
Gotcha.
Talking about was that?
Oh, I got a list of questions. but
Go
it's
ahead,
okay.
no, go ahead.
I'm sorry. So have we looked at what the projected housing growth is in the county in, the next year or two? Because I know I had a concerned resident, a citizen, call me and say, hey, there's a neighborhood going up. They're projected to have 80 homes built. you know, I think that they are not your starter level homes, and I think that, you know, the cost of the houses are, you know, above, you know, 100,000, 120,000. So, and there's 80 of them going up. And so it kind of, I thought to myself, well, you know, think about it. So what is the growth in the county as far as the housing is concerned? Because if the county grows, we're going to get the revenue off of those new houses. I mean, is that right?
And what happens when the county assessment grows, you're limited to, even if you levy the 4% rate, you're limited to that 4% revenue growth. I can tell you, it's been a while, but I do expect this to happen at some point. Things are going to be good enough for long enough that the assessment will grow, and the rates, there've been years that the rate dropped.
Yes, and that's been several times in the late 90s and before the issues with some housing costs and stuff in the early 2000s. Not know specifically about Nelson County, but there were several counties surrounding us that actually did have small decreases because they could only levy up to the total of 4%. So if the houses are built and we get more income in, we're still capped at 4% more than what the budget is. So we cannot, you know, it could actually, our rate could decrease instead of increase.
And that has happened over the years, yes, it's happened. It's been a while.
It has been a while.
But again, I expect those times to return. I would thought they would have been here by now, honestly.
Okay. So then you had said that, you had made a statement that with one of your justifications, you said that we were 150, our school district was 150th out of 170 schools in the district. What does that mean?
That's what we spend on a per pupil basis.
What we spend?
Yes, ma'am.
So that means we spend, so if we're 150 out of 170, we spend less or we spend?
We spend less than 140, we spend less than 149 districts.
That's the bottom.
And that per pupil cost, that's factoring in all expenses within the district. Essentially, it's the gas, the diesel, the bus, the utilities, salaries, facility fixes, technology. You take that entire spend, divide by how many students you've got, and that gives you that per pupil spend.
And those are not my numbers, they're right off the
Sure,
CDE
no, I
website.
gotcha. No. Okay, so now, we talked, or the nurse expansion, okay? And so you've got this tied into that as well. However, we had mentioned that we will probably see revenue off of that once we start billing Medicaid and get those reimbursements
Right.
for it. So why is that part of this?
Well, if you'll look at the spreadsheet, you'll see additional revenue on the top here, the Medicaid revenue that's a part of that nursing expansion, and the corresponding expense, because we have to hire those nurses. So I am assuming that those nurses are going to be paid for with the Medicaid expansion or the Medicaid billing that comes along with them. So there's no real cost. What I'm showing you there is it's going to pay for itself.
But
That
it
makes
is,
sense?
but it is still a new cost, is what the red means.
It is a new cost, but you're also generating the offsetting revenue to go with it. That makes sense?
There will
Yeah,
be
zero
there will
time.
be some startup costs, yes.
Yeah.
Now, they should be reasonably insignificant, and we hope eventually to actually offset those too.
Yeah, I'm very excited about that, but we'll talk about it later. Have we approached the sheriff's office to see if we can get some help with that SRO officer, or?
We've been in contact with the sheriff and his police chief.
They both been very adamant about what we need to do.
Yeah, they're very supportive, and they are helping us. I don't know that they had money in their budget to provide anything.
Yeah.
It's going to be on our dime, but they are very supportive of the program, and, you know, we expect that person, when they're on board, will be a liaison to law enforcement agencies in the community, and they're very supportive of the program.
You know, I would say
I
I
talked to them again, they was very adamant about how we need to fix our issues, and I know we got some issues we need to address for the safety of all children in Nelson County. But I'll be discussing with her. They discuss some things with me, so.
Yeah, I think if I remember right, I don't remember if Mr. Hawkins Smith or Mr. Brown had said that both city police as well as county sheriff's office were, I'll use the word adamant, I don't know if that's the right word, but adamant that they wanted the school district to be the one that hired those SROs, or SRO or plural if it needed to be, which I think is why we were having to file paperwork to become a law enforcement agency.
That's correct. We all proved that if you.
And in a case like that, if we're the ones that are going to be paying for them, we want to make sure we have full control over that as well. So
That's correct. Sheriff Mattingly was very, and he actually pointed it out to Tim and I that it would be advantageous for the district to actually be the employer. And let me say that both Chief Marksberry and Sheriff Mattingly have been extremely helpful and supportive in this and looking for ways to help us.
It's good to hear.
Diane, did you have, sorry, Mr. Green, did you have some more questions there?
No,
I
okay.
thought- Okay. The one that I'm wondering about, and I don't know if this is something that you've got in maybe another document, something that I always look for every year. $100,000 property is a nice, easy number to deal with because it's easy to do multiples of. And I think in past years, sometimes we have a hard time getting what the median home value is. Usually it's somewhere in the 120-ish range.
I meant to get that for you, and I forgot it, but I will tell you, the difference in the current rate of 75 cents and the proposed rate of 76.4, if you got a $100,000 home, your rate would go from 700, your tax bill would go from, school tax, would go from 750 to 764. A few years ago, when we were working, Ms. Brady might have been a part of it on the LPC, the average or the median home price was about 122 and change.
Yeah.
So if it's 125,000, the difference in the tax rate on a 70 versus 75 and 76.4
About
would be
$17.
Yeah, something like that,
$17.50
yes.
a year.
Right.
So 12 months, $1.50 a month.
Yeah.
I'm doing dirty math here.
Right.
I mean, just in my head.
On $100,000, it's going to be like $1.22, $1.23.
And because I always think it's important to put that in perspective, because I do know all of us that live here in Nelson County, which I know all of us do, we get that property tax bill. We look at it, there's maybe, 4 or 5, half a dozen various taxes on there. There's a county tax, this tax, library tax, school tax. That's one of them that always we hear quite a bit about, is that it's more than any of the others combined. I think that does tie back, though, to the beginning of what you were talking about, in that some of those other entities do have other funding sources that they can go to throughout the year. They have regular recurring funding streams. County clerk's office, sheriff's office has funding streams and so forth, whereas we have two, and it's one time. It's the state funds and it's that tax fund. So it does make it look disproportionate to all the other pieces on that tax bill.
A couple more things to add, I think. Just a reminder, one difference between us and maybe some other agencies, we have cap sizes in schools. Kindergarten 24-1, high school's 31-1. In between there, the numbers are different. If enrollment in a school goes up, we have to provide more teachers. It's not, well, we don't have enough money. We are required by law to do that. We have to. If an IEP is developed and approved and a child requires additional support, we are required to provide that. So those are unique, I think, to school districts. One more thing on retirement systems, we talk a lot about that, and I think we all agree we want to, as hopefully a future retiree, I want the retirement system to be able to meet its obligations, and I want folks that are currently retired to be able to continue to receive the benefits they've been promised.
Thank you.
So it's hard. I certainly want that for everybody, and we know we're going to have to do our part in that. I just want to prepare you all for that. There's a cost associated with that I am certain is going to get shifted to the school districts. Certain.
Because historically, over the past 7 or 8 years, that's what's been happening, is the state's been shifting it to the school district. Something else that's, I don't even think that you brought up, transportation. Funding from the state on transportation has continued to be reduced. And That's not a optional thing that we provide, meaning that, well, we can't just say, well, if the state cuts funding by half, we'll just cut our bus routes by half as well. We still have to find those additional dollars somewhere to be able to do the pickup and return delivery of our students in a safe manner to their homes.
We get less money for transportation through the seat formula this year than we got in 2001.
And yet I'd say that we probably run as many, if not more, routes. And I bet that probably diesel's more expensive.
$1.42 a gallon in 2001. I have that in a presentation I did a few years ago. $1.42. We're actually we got a pretty good deal on it now. We had some years where we paid $3 or $4 a gallon for it. So yeah, but it's substantially more. But we received less in transportation reimbursement than we did 16 years ago.
I'm sorry. Cool.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I mean, probably one of the largest economic drivers in any community is the educational system that's there within that city, that county. You know, I still remember back to whenever Mr. Raker was on the school board as a vice president with the Salt River Electric. I don't know his exact title, but I think he was the one that whenever companies were looking to come into Bullitt County or Washington County or Nelson County, he'd meet them, take them around, show them places. I still remember him saying that one of the things that they always looked for is they wanted to go into the schools and see what the school's like. They always wanted to go into the restroom and see what the restroom looked like. But you may think that sounds kind of stupid, but one of the things they were looking for was whether or not that community cared enough about education that they then cared enough about what the restrooms within that school looked like. And you know, study after study has shown that the thing that can drive economic diversity within a community and positive economic growth is, do you have the workforce there? And I think you probably see this in a lot of the work that you do, Ms. Breeding, is if the workforce is available, companies will come and look at that community. If the workforce is not educated and it's not available, they don't even give it a consideration. They skip right on past it and go to the next one. You know, we've been pretty lucky here in Nelson County in that between the bourbon industry and some of the smaller manufacturing industries that we've been able to sustain some of the recession. But now as everybody's starting to come out of that, everybody's going to compete. So we've got to make sure that the students that we're producing, those citizens we're producing, are educated, whether it's for direct to the workforce or to go into college. And that doesn't come cheap, and it's all of our, as a community, responsibility to make sure that we're providing that opportunity for every single student within this county.
So based on this spreadsheet, this bottom line where it says net effect, and this is what basically we're going to be in the negative with.
Those are estimates.
Those are estimates.
Those are estimates, of course, but, you know, and I'm not factoring in a higher lag. That's the one thing that's not being factored in because we don't know what that is. Some years it's more than others. One thing that's also not included there, honestly, we did this several months ago and I forgot to include it, was the assistant principal we added. You all are aware of that's not reflected there. But neither is the higher lag. Those are estimates that I came up with. But you know, again, that's why we're recommending the 4%. And a big chunk of that is, again, it's an unknown. It's related to retirement match, I know. But I do believe something's going to happen there, and I think that's a pretty solid estimate to base that on. So,
I have a question.
yes, ma'am.
One that nobody probably wants to hear. And that is, I understand the 4% cap is because that's what the public doesn't get to vote on. But I'm looking at a 4% approval, still putting us in the negative where we want to be. And I think everything on here is a must-have, is not a nice-to-have. I think these are must-haves to have the educational system in this county that we need. If we wanted to not to, even with the contingencies, how long has it been since the county, since the school board has voted to raise it 6% versus 4%, to get us out of this potential red?
The only other option you'd have is the years when there are years when rates are certified and there's what we used to call subsection 2 rate, and now later subsection 1 rate with some legislative changes. That rate is not available to you. Nothing above the 4% is available.
Okay,
Right.
so right now, there's not.
There's nothing available right now. That's correct.
Okay.
And like you, we never want there to be a negative of red. And again, these are just estimates.
Right.
But also, that is somewhat what that contingency is there
Exactly.
for,
That's why we have
in case we do go into the red. Now, of course, I think that the projected 180, well, that's not a good example because there could be some offset with
There's a 100% offset in
reimbursements.
spreadsheet.
But the SRO, the $75,000 estimate for a school resource officer, I assume that's for a year's salary. We're already, almost a quarter of the way through the year, so we could possibly be looking at, if we hired them October 1, and if it was a $75,000 a year with all benefits included, it would still be less being spent.
I understand all that, I understand math. I'm just trying to understand that we are capped at 4%, so it wouldn't matter if that number was minus 255,000, we couldn't raise it any higher than 4% anyway, so it is what it is.
So
We
what's
would
in our
be looking-
contingency? How much is in our contingency?
We began the year about $2.4 million. That's not the exact number, but it's really close, at 2.4 million.
And what do we have to keep in there?
You're required to have a 2% contingency. You've got roughly 5 to 6% in there. The recommended figure is 5, at least 5.
Yeah, you're required to have 2, recommended is 5, but in this uncertain environment with the pensions, it's very good that this county is a little to the plus side of 5.
Plus, I want to see these nurses get in these schools. We got some major health issues in these schools. I don't want nothing to happen to these children. And we got to have an SRO officer. In our time, in day and time, we got to protect our children. Once to learn and everything, we got to protect them. This is some way I know how to protect these kids, to give them a learning environment.
My other question is, if we're 150th out of 173 of what we spend per student head, how do we compare in our tax rate? Are we, is Nelson County, I just think I know this, I may not, that my tax rate on my house in Nelson County is much lower than Oldham County, much lower than Jefferson, I'm going to wager guess much lower than Hardin. Is there a correlation between, there has to be a correlation between what we spend per head on student and what the tax rate is?
Not really.
Is there not?
Not really.
Then where are they getting money that we don't have?
There are inequities in the seat formula that I've talked about for years. There are inequities. Some of the wealthiest districts in the per pupil expense. If you were to go to the KD site and look at that document I'm referring to, it's an Excel spreadsheet. If you were to look at that and you looked at tax rates and you looked at total revenue or expenses per pupil, which are roughly the same, you're going to find some of the lowest tax rates, in some cases, have some of the most expenses per pupil. There's some serious inequities in the formula. One of the things I've talked about for years is utility tax. There are some districts that are smaller than we are that generate more utility tax than we do, but that is not equalized, so there's no offset in seek. Does that make sense? And that's just one piece. You talk about it all night long, but they don't necessarily correlate, is I guess the point.
I think there's some good examples too. A lot of the Eastern Kentucky districts, which have lower tax rates because their tax base just isn't there, that property base isn't there, get quite a bit more dollars from the state. When all that's put together, their per pupil spending at times will, probably quite a few of those 149 are from Eastern Kentucky that are spending more per pupil. But they've got very low property tax rates because they just don't have the property base to tax.
And then you have on the far end of that spectrum, you've got Jefferson County. Jefferson County generates, if you were to go to the end of that document, you'd see that they have about 50% more per pupil to spend than we do. Jefferson County with 90,000 plus students.
Anchorage Independent.
Yeah, they spend substantially more than we do.
Go to Scott County and stuff, yeah.
Yeah. So-
And the only other, I made the comment earlier about, we got those two sources. We got the state funds, we got the local funds. There is only one other revenue source that we have, and that is occupational tax, which we've always avoided talking about. There are, half a dozen
Not many, I don't know.
districts in the state that also, in addition to a property tax, they levy an occupational tax. Of course, that's not something we've ever wanted to consider here because both our city government as well as our county government have an occupational tax that's levied, and we've always tried to avoid that because that would just be an additional duplication on occupational tax.
If there's no other questions, you want to turn it over to guests for comments? Thank you.
All right, so our guest comment policy, any person wishing to address the board may do so by following these rules. Individuals representing themselves are limited to 3 minutes. Individuals representing a group are limited to 5 minutes. Please step up to the microphone, state your name and address, and if you represent a group, state the name of the group you are representing.
Linda Gooden, 3265 Patton Road, Boston, Kentucky. I just have a couple of questions, really. The budget mentioned a negative that includes CERS. I don't know exactly what that is.
Certified, classified retirement system.
Okay, that included fiscal year 2019, so that really doesn't address this budget.
That's correct. It was right on the spreadsheet. That doesn't go in, there is an actual increase that's going into effect this year. That is a projected increase for the following year, but then would be a recurring expense every year thereafter.
Yeah, so it shouldn't be considered for this budget because it really made a glaring negative that isn't truly this year's budget. And they said, you stated that the income was only from real estate, and that's not true. Utilities are taxed, telephone is taxed, cable is taxed, internet is taxed, water bills are taxed, the electric is taxed, vehicles are taxed. So everything is assessed. So there's a lot of income other than just real estate. And you said you had less students. Has there been any decrease in staffing since you said you had to increase staffing if you realized more students? That's all.
I would assume the 119 or whatever that number was.
219, I think.
No, 100.
Oh, I'm sorry.
If it was in one school building, it might happen, but most likely this is spread across
Spread
the entire
equally
district.
across.
And so therefore, maybe one in this class, two in that class, so
Gotcha.
then.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? All right. Then I will need a motion to adjourn the tax hearing.
Motion.
Mr. Jackie made the motion. I need a second.
I'll second.
Mr. Norman second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. We're going to take a 10-minute break before we begin the working session.